Thank you. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'm gaveling our informational hearing to order. I am so proud to be chairing our hearing this morning. My name is Jenny Spencer, and I represent Ward 15 on Cleveland City Council. And I'd truly like to welcome everyone, our distinguished guests, members of the public, and members of the media. And I would like to take a moment to send the City of Cleveland's wishes for support and solidarity to the families of East Palestine, Ohio. And I'd also like to open this hearing by thanking the residents of Ward 15. Going back years, you have sent me photos of railcar placards, videos of trains hauling tank cars through our densely populated neighborhoods, and you have pointed out the failing infrastructure owned by rail companies. Today's hearing is for you and for all the residents of the city of Cleveland. I am going to be joined, I'm grateful to have my colleagues this morning participating, Councilman Michael Polensek, Councilman Kevin Bishop, Councilman Danny Kelly. We're going to be joined by a couple other council members shortly, but again, we wanted to get started to be respectful of everyone's time this morning. I'll be running us through a few slides. Good morning, Councilwoman. So it is certainly not lost on anyone that Cleveland is a legacy city and that significant rail infrastructure passes through our wards and neighborhoods. This map was sourced from the Surface Transportation Board and put together by our policy and research staff. And now I'd like to take a moment to ask us to imagine what an evacuation scenario might look like in Cleveland. This map was prepared by our research staff, and it depicts a 1-mile evacuation radius around our freight lines, which is the evacuation distance that was required in the East Palestine derailment. Cleveland City Council was aware of concerns about rail safety dating back to June 2020, when our body passed Resolution 465-2020, The resolution referenced moves by Norfolk Southern Railroad to route an increased volume of hazardous materials through our densely populated neighborhoods. This resolution was passed in the early days of the pandemic, and obviously, we all know what happened in East Palestine, which brings us to today. I'd also like to reference Resolution 340-2023, which Cleveland City Council approved last night, which is a call for passage of the bipartisan Railway Safety Act of 2023, co-sponsored by U.S. Senators Sherrod Brown and J.D. Vance. And also today we'll be highlighting some legislation occurring at the state level as well. I want to take us on a brief tour, walk us through our time together this morning. It is really important to highlight that today is an informational hearing. We will learn a lot today, but surely we will leave with many questions for follow-up. First, after my opening comments, we're going to welcome Jessica Colombi to the table, who is the Director of Cleveland City Council's Director of Policy and Research for Cleveland City Council, who will provide a federal agency overview, and she will be joined by a guest, Dr. Auck. Following that, we will hear about the Railway Safety Act of 2023 from representatives from our congressional delegation and about other bills pending in the Ohio legislature. And then we'll spend the majority of our time speaking with the Bibb administration about our jurisdiction as the city, understanding our emergency preparedness and response. And again, I really want to highlight, especially for our colleagues, that the first part of this informational hearing, when we do our federal agency overview and touch upon the Railway Safety Act of 2023, that is purely informational. We are not going to have Q&A at that time. But when we move into the second part of our agenda, related to the City of Cleveland's jurisdiction and emergency preparedness, we're very fortunate to have many representatives from the Bibb administration here today talking about these important topics, and we will have Q&A from council members. I am going to hold us to 2 minutes per person for questions, and people can go back on the list if they want and need to for further questions. But I anticipate a really rich discussion, and again, welcome. And without further ado, I'm going to welcome Jessica Colombi to the table.
And if it's okay, I'd like to bring Dr. Auck up with me at this time.
Yes.
Please. Good morning, members of council. Councilwoman Spencer, thank you so much for having me, and I'm so excited to have our guest, Dr. Ted Auck, who I'll be turning the mic over to in just a moment. We had a terrific briefing yesterday. Thank you. With the Federal Rail Administration, Federal Railroad Agency, the FRA, and they took us through an incredible amount of information in about a 45-minute briefing. One of the things that I'm really excited to tell you about is the fact that they've made themselves available to us as a resource. This is an ongoing conversation. They're not able to present directly in a setting like this, but they're available to us as a resource, and they've also sent us materials. The policy team, we keep our own resources library, so we'll be able to have information for you to reference after this hearing and on an ongoing basis. So they took us through, as they even joked, a bit of the alphabet soup here of federal agencies. We have the Surface Transportation Board, which is an independent federal agency. They actually do not report to the Department of Transportation. They are charged with the economic regulation of various modes of surface transportation, which is primarily freight rail. The National Transportation Safety Board, otherwise known as NTSB, also an independent federal agency that is responsible for accident investigation. Also, they do not report to the Department of Transportation. Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, they do report to the Department of Transportation. Their mission is to protect people and the environment by advancing the safe transportation of energy and other hazardous material that are essential to our daily lives. The Federal Railroad Administration, who I misnamed, I'm sorry, at the beginning, their mission is to enable the safe, reliable, and efficient movement of people and goods across the country. Under them is the hazmat division, which minimizes where possible eliminates the risk inherent to transporting hazardous materials by rail, and to enforce hazardous materials regulation and verify compliance with appropriate international regulations. They pointed out to us that they're responsible for the trains that come through Mexico and go into Canada, so they have to be facile with international regulations and various industry standards. We found that very grounding to understand who does what, who's responsible for what, yes. So as I said, it was an ongoing conversation, and we found out something pretty important, that the FRA makes available various federal grants available for first responder training and emergency preparedness training. Now, they usually grant at the state level, and then the state sub-grants to municipalities. I think, yes, one of the things, the Surface Transportation Board, one of the other, we actually have a full list, we got that this morning, of the different grants that can be applied for. So we have those, again, the policy team has access to that information. The Surface Transportation Board, we also learned, has jurisdiction over freight rates, services, practices, and disputes, rail restructuring transactions such as mergers, sales, construction, and abandonments. The Surface Transportation Board also has jurisdiction over certain passenger rail matters like intercity bus industry, non-energy pipelines, household goods, carriers' tariffs, and rate regulation of non-contiguous domestic water transportation. The National Transportation Safety Board, since its creation in 1967, well, I already actually talked about what they do. Of all of these, sorry, I talked about what they were doing. Got a little mixed up on my notes here. During our briefing, again, we asked questions around line abandonments as an example. Hello, good morning. We are just going over the federal agencies that are responsible for rail and transportation, and the terrific briefing that we had with them yesterday. We asked questions around line abandonments, which actually references back to Council's 2020 resolution that Councilwoman Spencer shared with us a few moments ago. The FRA offered to connect us to the Surface Transportation Board for this discussion. They also actually pointed out if you want to reroute a rail line, you need the Surface Transportation Board's approval. We also spent time covering key definitions with them, including high hazard flammable trains, HHFTs, as they were very casually referred to, which are defined as 20 or more loaded tank cars of Class 3 flammable liquid in a continuous block, or a single train carrying 35 or more loaded tank cars of Class 3 flammable liquid. A really important follow-up question that I think Dr. Auk might speak to is we asked about communication. So we have yet to hear, but we hopefully will soon find out who alerts whom when hazardous material is being transported through certain parts of Cleveland. How are you notified? When are you notified? How people are notified? Should they be notified? So we need a bit more dialogue with FRA on that point. At this point, I would like to introduce, thank you for that point of privilege. It was really a great conversation, and we learned a ton. And as is the policy and research team's responsibility, we do consult subject matter experts, and we're so glad that Dr. Auk contacted Cleveland City Council, actually, because of his distinct areas of expertise and what he thinks we should know. Dr. Auk, again, as the Councilwoman said, is not available to take questions at this table at this moment, but he has agreed to share his contact information with us, and he will be available as a resource to Cleveland City Council moving forward. So, Dr. Auk, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. Hello, everyone. My name is Ted Auk. I have been researching the environmental, social, and economic impacts of oil and gas development, including the mechanisms by which oil and gas get from where it is produced to where it is consumed, processed for plastics, export, and energy for over 10 years now. I've written on the interaction between energy production and water scarcity, the primacy of regulatory agencies like Ohio's Department of Natural Resources, data inconsistencies across states with a history of fossil fuel production, and the demographics of natural gas pipeline resistance and support. In recent years, it has become the focus of my work more and more on the role that rail plays in the aforementioned transport mechanisms for fossil fuels, including the economics, labor, and environmental impacts of moving raw commodities and extremely volatile substances by rail. I am an adjunct faculty at John Carroll University. I'm a member of the NAACP Ohio's Environmental Justice Advisory Board. I also serve on the U.S. EPA Environmental Justice Screen Science Advisory Board, and I'm the Midwest Program Director for a nonprofit called Frac Tracker Alliance. Where did I leave off? Excuse me. Where we research, we are researchers, cartographers, and big data analysts working to address the massive information asymmetries that exist between communities and the multinational resource corporations like Norfolk Southern looking to extract resources, transport resources by any means necessary. I received my PhD from the University of Vermont modeling climate impacts on forest processes, and prior to that pursued a master's at Virginia Tech, where I identified best practice for optimizing reforestation on strip mines in central Appalachia. I and my wife live with our 2 boys. My 9-year-old, incidentally, woke up this morning seeing me put one of these on and asked me what it was. So he was very startled to see his dad in a tie. We live in Shaker Heights, and I come before this committee with an interest in shedding some light about what I've learned from my research that I've described, and also the last month I've spent in East Palestine, and what the East Palestine train derailment of February 3rd portends for rural and urban communities alike. I was asked to give you a list of some of the things that I would suggest we think about. I'm going to speak really 30,000 foot at this point right now. I think that's the most appropriate thing to do. So I came up with a list of about 5 or 6 items that I'd like to present to you. Number 1 is an absolute emphasis must be placed on a holistic emergency management plan capable of dealing with and accounting for the types of materials more and more frequently transported by rail. I say this more and more frequently because we know from companies like Norfolk Southern, CSX, and the aforementioned Surface Transportation Board hearings of last year, April of 2022, that the industry, Norfolk Southern, CSX, Union Pacific, BNSF, these kinds of corporations are more and more adhering to the whims and the needs of Wall Street and large investors rather than the needs of their employees and the communities that they travel through. And as a result of that, the profit margins on some of these high-value, high-density, raw commodities like we saw explode and ignite in East Palestine, or even in 2013, Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, Canada, those are the things that they want to transport more and more. And they want to leave some of the lower value, lower density products to the trucking industry. This emergency management plan must do away with silos, must emphasize first responder safety, as we saw in East Palestine, where those men and women went in blind and with no equipment to handle what they were going through. Now, granted, we're talking about a volunteer emergency management staff, but the point remains. And we must similarly emphasize large enough evacuation zones and durations. I would argue, based on my research in East Palestine, I would argue that based on my research in East Palestine and the conversations that I had with residents in East Palestine, that the 1-mile evacuation zone was not nearly enough. That's not to say that I know what that evacuation zone is, but did not suffice. Number 2, methods by which residents, regardless of whether they are digital natives or the elderly, are warned and, if necessary, moved outside of evacuation zones. This is something we saw repeatedly in East Palestine. People did not know how. If they were elderly, they did not have a method to get out of the evacuation zone in a timely manner, or they were not warned because they are not digital natives. Requiring that train car manifests be made publicly available immediately in a format, preferably digitally, that makes them accessible in real time. This is not to say that everyone wants this information, but to quote former Justice Brandeis, sunlight is the best form of disinfectant. And I would argue with this industry, they need more sunlight with regard to the kinds of data that needs to be available to people to make these decisions necessary. Emergency responder training for events like East Palestine. Are responders, this is a question now, are responders equipped to handle black swan outlier events like what happened in East Palestine? I would argue that they're probably not. I don't think we're talking realistically, factually, about what's moving through cities like Cleveland and rural areas like East Palestine, and we don't really have a real handle for that. And if not, they need to be, because the rail industry, as I said, is increasingly moving these kinds of products through cities like Cleveland. City councils should issue a statement of public support for the types of demands being made by the made of the rail industry by the dozen or so labor organizations that represent rail workers, including a cap on train length, strict speed limits regardless of time of day, built-in buffers between train cars carrying hazardous materials, and an end to share buybacks and market forces being adhered to at the expense of thorough maintenance and employee health safety. I'd like to kind of finish that off by saying that underneath all of what we're talking about today is my final statement, which is you have forces getting involved in the rail industry that know dangerously little about the mechanics of the industry and the needs of the workers in terms of inspection times and that kind of thing. Inspection times have dropped from 8 minutes down to 30 to 45 seconds at times. You ask any engineer or conductor, they'll tell you they need at least 8 to 15 minutes to inspect every train car. And why is that? That's because we have seen, in the name of something called precision scheduled railroad. Oh, sorry about that. I don't know where. Oh, so yeah. So what I was trying to say is underneath all of this is an adherence to something called precision scheduled rail, which some of you have probably heard about now. That started off as a way to identify and address and fix the inefficiencies within the rail industry dozens of years ago. But quickly what ended up happening with that concept was, and as you would imagine, when Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, some of these large investors get involved, they shed all of the efficiencies that are identified by the people that work their way up through the industry, from engineers to conductors to management opportunities. And they shed all of that, and they laser focus on share buybacks and profit margins. And that's the underlying problem. All of these things that we're talking about, everything that I recommended, and the Surface Transportation Board deals with, are underneath all of that is that focus, and we need to address that. So with that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ock. And Jessica, thank you very much. And it's not, for those who are going to come up to the table shortly, we're not quite ready for the administration. We're going to hear about the Railway Safety Act of 2023 next. But if you haven't been up here before, it's good to talk directly into the mic. But that was very enlightening, and we appreciate, Dr. Ock, you making yourself available for follow-up questions. Sure. Thank you very, very much. And I also want to thank our additional colleagues who have joined us this morning, Councilwoman Rebecca Moore, our Cleveland City Council President Blaine Griffin, Councilman Danny Kelly, and Councilman Charles Slife, and Councilman Joe Jones. So it's great to be with everybody this morning. I anticipate that we have representatives here from a congressional delegation who indicated they would attend this morning. I am not sure if they are in the audience or not. One individual is Kimberly Edwards, who is Deputy Chief of Staff and District Director for Congresswoman Shontel Brown.
Actually, I'm standing in sort of.
Oh, you are? Okay. Please come forward. Thank you. Please introduce yourself, and thank you for being here.
Hi there. My name is Nate Benson. I'm a caseworker and field representative for Congresswoman Shontel Brown, and I'm reading a letter on her behalf.
Thank you.
Dear Cleveland City Council, I write in support of Cleveland City Council's recent efforts urging Congress to strengthen rail safety in Ohio's 11th Congressional District and across the United States following the East Palestine train derailment on February 3rd. Protecting our communities means enacting effective policies to safeguard our railways. The Bipartisan Rail Act will establish meaningful reforms and improve the accountability of railroad corporations and strengthen inspection protocols, especially regarding the transportation of hazardous materials. Toxic derailments pose a serious environmental risk to our communities in Ohio, particularly for marginalized groups already suffering from environmental injustices. The Rail Act will be a critical step towards ensuring that every community can live free from fear of environmental dangers from toxic derailments and prevent future catastrophic accidents on our rail systems. I applaud the efforts of the Cleveland City Council urging Congress to take action following the East Palestine crisis, and I remain committed to working to secure bipartisan policies that improve the safety of our railways and rail workers. Sincerely, Congresswoman Shontel Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benson. Appreciate you being here representing the Congresswoman and her team this morning. Thank you very much.
Of course.
I'd like to invite next to the table, I believe we have Mr. Brian Ayers with us this morning, which thank you so much for coming out this morning, Brian. Brian Ayers is Regional Representative and Special Projects Coordinator for U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown. It's great to meet you in person.
I know, right?
We've talked on the phone, yeah.
I apologize, I'm an old military guy, so if I get too loud when speaking in the microphone, just let me know. I'm here to read a letter on behalf of Senator Sherrod Brown. Friends, I want to thank you for taking this much needed step of addressing the issues and concerns all Ohioans have regarding the transportation of toxic chemicals by rail. This body took the bold step of adopting an emergency resolution on June 3rd, 2020, to condemn Norfolk Southern Corporation for rerouting daily trains carrying highly toxic, flammable crude oil and ethanol through the city of Cleveland. Unfortunately, your concerns were warranted. It's why I introduced bipartisan legislation with Senator J.D. Vance to make trains safer as they go through communities like East Palestine. We want to do everything in our power to make sure that accidents like we've seen in Ohio never happen again. The Railway Safety Act of 2023 will improve rail safety protocols, finally standing up to railroad company lobbyists so no other community has to deal with what East Palestine and others in Ohio, including residents of Springfield, Sandusky, and Steubenville, have dealt with. This bill will enhance safety procedures for all trains carrying hazardous materials, preventing wheel-bearing failures, requiring two-person crews, making rail carriers pay for their wrongdoing, supporting communities impacted by rail disasters, and investing in the next generation of safety improvements. It shouldn't take a train derailment for elected officials to put partisanship aside and work for the people we serve, not corporations like Norfolk Southern. I look forward to working with you all on this important issue, and please contact my office anytime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ayers. Appreciate you being here this morning. And of note, this is the resolution that Council passed last night, directly references the Railway Safety Act of 2023, which is bipartisan legislation in the U.S. Senate, co-sponsored by Senator Sherrod Brown and Senator J.D. Vance. We have been in contact with Senator Vance's state director, who also plans to send a statement, which we have not received yet this morning, but they were very gracious and stated that anything that municipalities can do, such as Cleveland City Council, to support the advocacy around passage of the Railway Safety Act will be impactful. So we're very encouraged by that and appreciate having made contact with both, having Mr. Ayers here from Senator Brown's office, as well as with the office of Senator J.D. Vance. I'm going to take a point of privilege here next before we move on to our next part of our agenda. I'm not sure what slides we got. Okay, we're on this slide. I also had the pleasure of speaking with State Rep. Bride Rose Sweeney, who is part of our delegation, Northeast Ohio delegation to the Ohio State House. And I have a statement from her, but she indicated that the entire delegation from Northeast Ohio is also incredibly interested in and committed to changes at the state level that are also necessary to keep us safe. So really, one of the takeaways from this part of the hearing that we hope everyone will have is that all levels of government are involved in these necessary changes. We have critically important federal legislation because we know that the federal agencies have chief responsibility for regulating rail, but the state has a role as well. So I will briefly read excerpts from Rep. Sweeney's statement. As the ranking member of the Ohio House Finance Committee, I appreciate the opportunity to explain the rail safety initiatives currently pending at the Ohio State House. In the wake of the East Palestine disaster, it is essential to work together at the federal, state, and local levels to protect our communities, shore up public confidence, and prevent future catastrophes. While the federal government shoulders the responsibility of regulating railroads, the state still has an important role to play in working with the Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, and railroad companies not only to ensure public safety, but also the safety of the workers on the trains. Ohio boasts one of the largest and densest rail networks in the nation, making us statistically more likely to be affected by these derailments. The railroad companies have always said the state's hands are tied when it comes to rail safety, but that is simply not the case. We have reviewed similar rail safety measures in other states, worked with well-respected rail safety attorneys and rail workers unions, and vetted our proposals through the nonpartisan Ohio Legislative Service Commission to arrive at the current proposal. As you may know, my colleagues and I succeeded in amending rail safety provisions into HB 23, the biennial state transportation budget. That bill is currently starred for a committee vote this week in the Ohio Senate. And I will briefly now highlight a few of the provisions in those amendments to the biennial state transportation budget. One is related to wayside detector systems. The House passed 2 amendments that require the state to work with railroad companies to make sure these detectors actually work and ensure that train crews are notified when a defect is detected. Another amendment was related to 2-person train crews, requiring that a freight train have at least a 2-person crew for safety purposes. A third amendment is related to a hazardous waste transportation report, requiring the PUCO, in collaboration with the Ohio EPA, to compile and submit a written report to the General Assembly pertaining to the transportation of hazardous materials and hazardous waste. And finally, an amendment related to a railroad safety technology report, requiring the PUCO to examine both current uses of and best practice for use of railroad safety technologies. So I think it just, again, bears noting that none of these pieces of legislation or amendments are finalized, neither at the federal level nor at the state level. There is a lot of work to do, but we certainly wanted to convey the degree to which there is collaboration and cooperation between levels of government, and it really sets the context, I think, for the local work that's so necessary here in Cleveland. So thank you all very much. We are going to move now into inviting the members of the BIB administration to the table. Chief Bradford Davey and will open us up. And thank you. And we'll do introduction shortly. And this is the portion of the hearing where I invite my colleagues to ask questions. I think there's going to be a lot of rich and enlightening information that's presented, and we certainly want to allow some time for council members to ask questions. Chief Davey, I didn't get a chance to catch you ahead of this, but I know that there are a number of slides. My inclination is to kind of go section by section and pause for Q&A after each section rather than running through the full presentation at once. Would you be amenable to that?
I would be amenable.
Okay. So let's proceed in that way, and I am going to pass this over to you.
Great.
To advance the slides.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Mayor Bibb and the administration, I'd like to just thank Cleveland City Council for convening today's conversation. I would specifically like to acknowledge my Councilwoman Spencer, and Jessica Columbi for their leadership on convening today's session. As you know and heard today, railways are complex entities whose infrastructure networks span our country and whose operations impact the lives of every American in both big and small ways. Given the expansiveness of our railway system, it's ultimately the responsibility of the federal government through the Federal Rail Administration and the others that you heard about earlier for oversight on the industry. While as a city we have some limited control over railways and their infrastructure, we play an important convening role. And we've demonstrated our ability to do so through our response to East Palestine and the coordination of federal advocacy with our neighboring cities and pushing for continued preparedness both locally and regionally. Today, we hope to provide you with a deeper understanding of our emergency operations, which we believe will give you confidence in our preparedness and clarity in our process to respond. At your request, we've assembled a highly skilled team which will cover various aspects of our authority over both railroads and emergency operations. We'll have our Chief Legal Officer, Mark Griffin, providing some context on the ordinances and legal oversight from the city. We have Assistant Director Keisha Chambers from MOCAP to provide a sense of our oversight over physical infrastructure that are traversing our neighborhoods. Chief Section Engineer Tom Boyer, who will provide insights with Assistant Director of the Office of Emergency Management, Nicole Carlton. Chief of Fire, Anthony Luke, Fire Marshal, Captain David Telman, our Public Health Director, David Margolius, there he is at the end of the table, and we'll provide you some comments from our Communications Department on our response. As requested from the Councilwoman, we will take these section by section. I'm gonna turn it over first to my colleague, who I realize I didn't introduce, Ryan Puente from our Government Affairs Shop and our Deputy Chief of Staff to provide some comments at the high level.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Council, for having us today regarding federal railroad safety. Is this on? Can you hear me? Sorry. We continue to work with various coalitions, the Mayor's administration, and advocating with the DOT, the FRA, as well as Senator Brown's office and Senator Vance's as the congressional delegations. We're working largely with the Cuyahoga County Mayors and City Managers Association, as well as the Ohio Municipal League and the Ohio Mayors Alliance. As it relates to the County Mayors and Managers Association, Mayor Graven of Olmsted Falls
Mr. Chairman, I know you're speaking in the microphone, but you just got to be a little clearer.
I'm just going to
Thank you, because I want to hear you, Ryan. Yeah, come on.
Mayor Graven continues to take the lead for the Mayors and Managers Association. He has a lot of railroads that run through his community in Olmsted Falls. So on February 28th, he led a delegation of mayors and managers in D.C. They drafted a letter and delivered it personally to the Director of Government Relations at DOT, and they continue to support legislation and regulations concerning the disclosure of hazardous materials, which is a big sticking point for the mayor of Olmsted Falls. In addition to that, on March 1st, many members of the Mayors and Managers Association met with Senator Brown and Vance at 2 separate meetings, and the senators listened to the association's concerns. And then the Ohio Municipal League is continuing discussions with members of the Ohio General Assembly, as Councilwoman Spencer outlined, as well as federal partners to be more engaged. And then we signed on to a letter from the National League of Cities also advocating on this issue. So our advocacy is primarily through a large number of coalitions around the state, and we'll continue to work with them on letters, advocacy meetings, et cetera, on this issue.
With that, I would just ask if there's any questions
On that point, Madam Chairwoman, to Ryan, you said you're working with the National League of Cities.
Yeah.
There's a delegation of us that's going down there. So if you want us to lobby on behalf as a collective, we can do that,
Okay.
taking the letter down there and seeing if we can pass some kind of resolution concerning that.
Yeah, and I'll also share the letter that we signed on to, and then if council is interested in a resolution, I think that would be helpful too. So I'll follow up with Councilman Jones on that point.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much. I know this, that was a very high-level kind of intro to all of the behind-the-scenes work that's going, all the collaboration that's necessary and coordination. Do any colleagues have questions for Chief Puente before we move on to our next slide? Okay, thank you.
As a point of transition, I might tee up our colleague, Chief Luke, just to provide a quick note on the FEMA tabletop exercise, which I think fits squarely in this bucket as well.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here. As a normal part of our operations, the Division of Fire benchmarks our capacity against national events. So when East Palestine happened, we did what we normally do. And we researched on what we could do to increase our training, increase our capacity, and we came across FEMA conducts tabletop exercises on a regular basis with several municipalities at the same time. In the first week of April, we're conducting a tabletop exercise here with several municipalities on rail emergency incidents. Additionally, through the governor's office and in conjunction with Norfolk Southern, a rail training institute was created in the state of Ohio, specifically in response to the East Palestine incident. That training begins the end of this week, and my entire command staff was basically first in line. We're all going to that rail training exercise center to get additional training and once again benchmark our capacity against what could possibly happen in the city of Cleveland.
I will briefly share that we will be delving into these topics a little more deeply as we proceed through the presentation. However, Councilman Polensek, did you want to ask a question?
I'll wait till we get through the rest of the, thank you.
Okay, great.
As with everything we do, we first coordinate our responses with our legal department to understand our authority and our responsibility to address issues. And so I'll ask Chief Griffin to provide an overview on the city's legal authority on these matters.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Davey. I'm joined at the table today by Assistant Director of Law Shirley Tomasello, who is our subject matter expert when it comes to environmental and related issues. I'd like to talk a little bit about authority, both in terms of what happens in the event of a disaster, but also what is our authority to regulate. And so let me start with the easiest part first, which is that in the event of a disaster, the Ohio Revised Code section 373780 gives authority to manage our response to the local chief of the fire department. So in the event that we have a tragedy like happened in East Palestine, Chief Luke would be in charge until he relinquishes authority. And so that language is important because it would be up to Chief Luke to decide whether to transfer authority to state or federal regulators. So what we have is the ability to move quickly, provided that we have a plan that is going to work. So that's the easy part of my discussion today. The more difficult part is what is our authority to regulate? And as we think about how can we be proactive, first of all, I think I want to recognize the foresight of this council in having passed a resolution 2 years ago to note that this is an issue. And so as we think about how can we protect our residents and our citizens, I want to talk a little bit about the history of where, how we got to where we are, and then where we are today. So at the turn of the century, there was essentially no regulation, and municipalities like Cleveland began to regulate through a variety of places. The General Assembly eventually passed Ohio Revised Code section 723.48 to say that cities like Cleveland could regulate. And so we have on our books, based upon that, a series of ordinances under Cleveland Codified Ordinances section 631, which regulate things such as train speed, such as crossings, such as lights at crossings as well. And that was good until 1970, when the Federal Rail Safety Act was enacted by Congress, which preempted a great deal of what this city can do, what any city can do. And I'm going to summarize briefly, and then we'll kind of get into some more details as we go through the legal authority that we have set forth on the slide. But essentially what Federal Rail Safety Act of 1970 said was that municipalities can't regulate trains directly, but we can regulate things that are incident to trains. So by that, what courts have said, and in the city of Piqua challenged this, the city of Piqua had a speed ordinance to maintain reasonable speeds through their municipality, and the train industry, not surprisingly, was not happy about this. They took it to court, and the federal court concluded that it was preempted and noted that the preemption clause states that laws, regulations, and orders related to rail safety must be nationally uniform to the extent practicable, and that preemption clause expressly preempts any state law, rule, regulation relating to railroad safety. The federal provision preemption preempts not only state statutory and regulatory law, but also state common law. But of course, with anything, there is an exception. So the exception here is that under local safety hazardous ordinance savings clause, we are permitted to regulate only when local situations are not capable of being adequately encompassed within the national uniform standards, and there is a local safety hazard condition which permits specific regulation. The court in Piqua said that every court which has addressed the question has held that the language of 45 U.S.C. 43 does not permit local speed regulation. So we are confined. So what does that mean? So that means that where we are today is that we are permitted to regulate on the outskirts but not directly. So the key piece to this is that we are at a national level subject to the National Incident Management System, where we need to collaborate and cooperate with them. But within that, we have state and city regulations that can permit certain things. So let me talk a little bit about the state regulations. And a lot of these are about cooperation and information. And so as you heard from the letter from Bride Sweeney, much of what the state can do isn't direct, but has to do with information, notification, cooperation. So similarly, there are a number of state regulations that require interstate emergency management, intrastate mutual aid compact, so we can come to the aid of someone else or they can come to our aid, but also requires that the governor, if they step in, will utilize the services of existing agencies. And as I mentioned before, 373780 of the Ohio Revised Code indicates that the chief of the fire department is in charge until he relinquishes that authority. Okay, so what can we do as a city? Well, there are some things that we can do in the event of an emergency. Although the mayor has no express authority to declare an emergency, he does have the power to protect the peace. And we would argue that that would be strong enough for him to take the steps necessary to protect our citizens and our residents. And we also believe that that Chief Luke or whoever is the chief of fire department has the authority to protect our citizens and to take action at that time. But we can also have a variety of other incident-related statutes. With, for example, nuisance, air pollutions. We can have sealing orders as well. Certainly, our fire code, our fire chief would be authorized to issue abatement orders in an emergency to be immediately complied with. And then similarly, with respect to water, our Division of Water Control has authority to control discharges of water pollutants into water or sewer systems and issue abatement orders. So we have authority that is around rail safety, but not direct on rail safety. And we have the ability for our chief of the fire to plan ahead as required under NIMS and as Dr. Auk emphasized. And then in the event of an emergency, he has the authority to act quickly to protect the public interest.
Thank you, Chief Griffin. I'm going to start with a question or two and then open it up to our colleagues. I think this is understandably complex. There's a lot going on with various layers of law and code. And I just want to clarify to begin that it is our understanding that the City of Cleveland does have laws. This is perhaps to the Chief and to Ms. Tomasello. We do have laws on the books related to rail, but can you clarify how to put those into force, laws related to perhaps speed, the speeds at which trains can travel? We do currently have laws on our books, but...
To the chair, yes, we currently have laws on our books that were passed prior to the preemptive effect of the Federal Rail Safety Act of 1970. Those laws have not been challenged. They've been presumed to be preempted because of case law elsewhere. They have never been tested. So with many things, the answer is it depends. I think as we go through them, particularly Chapter 631 of the codified ordinances, many of those are likely to be considered to be preempted. And until they are tested in court, we can't know for sure. Let me just say we could go ordinance by ordinance and we can give you a view as to what is likely to be considered preempted. I think a significant number of them probably are, unfortunately.
Okay. I know that Councilman Joe Jones has a question, and then if anyone else does, you can let me know. Then Councilman Charles Slife. Go ahead, Councilman.
What I'm interested in and understanding, Madam Chairwoman, to the director is how many railroad routes do we have in the city of Cleveland? Do we have a mapping system that shows us, where a lot of these routes go, and who are the owners?
I will jump in, Councilman Jones. That was there was a slide at the very beginning of the hearing today that, and I know that policy and research staff can make this full PowerPoint available. The purpose of this section of the hearing is to ask Chief Griffin questions directly related to legal authority, and there are other sections to come in the presentation. So for now, this will focus on legal authority.
Yeah, that would be reason why I'm asking the initial layout of questioning was to have an idea of where those routes were, and then begin the process of, and I see here in terms of legal authority, one of the things that we're having a problem with in our community, because we have a line that runs, Madam Chairwoman, in our neighborhood, and it is a failure of whoever owns that railroad to maintain their property. And they're not, doing the basic things they're supposed to do, and it's a concern for me, Madam Chairwoman, given the fact that, one party in the United States of America has decided to deregulate. One party and it's not Democrats, have decided to deregulate the railroad system, causing for us to have this calamity that we have had. And so I guess one of the signs to tell that the industry doesn't care about a neighborhood and the community would be the fact that they're not maintaining their railroad sites. So I would need some assistance from the director. Who would be the responsible party to Madam Chairwoman, to the director that would be responsible for holding accountable the maintenance of these railroads? And in particular, I'm talking about the route that's at Lee and Miles, East 131st Street, and it rolls over into Kevin Bishop's ward, and it goes throughout our entire neighborhood, and it's horrible how they have not maintained those railroad tracks. Who would be accountable, Madam Chairwoman, to the director?
I'm looking at Chief Davey just for a moment. I know that I'm thinking maybe I should rescind my initial suggestion, which was to pause after each section. Because some of this is included in the full presentation, would you like to go through the full presentation and then
I can wait and hold the question, Madam Chairwoman, until the answer. Yes. I would yield to the chairman, because you have your own processes you want to roll through. But on that legal end, it would be who would be held responsible.
Through the chair to the councilman, thank you for your question. We will spend a bit of time having a conversation with our partners at MOCAP on infrastructure and authority. Of course, we can talk about the legalese related to this, but I might suggest that we move through the presentation, we take a pause, and then collaborate on questions. Is that okay? It's fantastic.
Unless my colleagues are opposed, so Councilman Polensek, Councilman Bishop, Councilman Slife, we're going to go ahead through the full presentation and then have all questions at the end.
I'm on board. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you.
With that, a good segue into the next part of our conversation, which is infrastructure authority. So I'll ask our Assistant Director, Keisha Chambers, to walk us through authority, and then ask our law team to tag team if appropriate.
Good morning. Am I heard? All right, thank you. As much to what was said as far as legal constraints, those also kind of overflow into what we are allowed to do related to the infrastructure of the railroad. So the city does have some limited responsibilities related to that space. What we do is, as our maintenance and reconstruction work requires, we do coordinate with the rail to address any safety concerns, specifically at those crossings. And we are responsible for the lighting that is on top of the bridge and even under the bridge, most specifically under the bridge. Any right-of-way that abuts the railroads, then we do maintain that right-of-way right up to the railroad. Road maintenance under the bridges, that is our responsibility. And any repair and maintenance responsibility is currently outfitted in all of the bridge ordinances that are in the city. So it's very defined what we can do and what we can't do in our city ordinances. So very limited responsibility. And if we do have some specific concerns that are the railroad responsibilities, then we do just contact them, and I'll proceed and get to that contact. But some of the rail safety issues that do come up are falling debris from bridges, failing drainage, failing concrete retaining walls, hazardous things abandoned in railways and on the roadways, hazardous rail crossings due to pavement conditions between rails, and damage caused by trucks failing to meet clearance under the rail bridges. So all of these things are the responsibility of the railroad to address and to correct. Other things that are responsible of the railroad is the pavements. As you're going over tracks, that pavement that is right there on the tracks, that's usually always crumbled. That is the railroad's responsibility. And also the signaling system is the railroad's responsibility. So we are very limited in what we can touch, what we can repair, and what we can address as it's related to the railroad system. And when we do see issues, MOCAP in conjunction with Public Works Department, we do have local representatives that we can contact. Typically, it is a phone call, and we'll make that phone call to them. The response time is typically about 3 to 5 days, and they will address those emergency repair issues that we bring to their attention. But we've always and often received comments from community about historic restoration of the rail bridges, but there's just a lot of things that are beyond the purview of the city and our department as well.
Thank you. I'll now ask one of our leaders from the Office of Emergency Management, Nicole Carlton, to walk us through emergency protocol, and please don't hesitate to tap in our other departments to assist.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. I'm going to go over what the Office of Emergency Management is responsible, and then I'll go into the EOC and then talking about the city's plans. So the Cleveland Office of Emergency Management, we actually fall within the Department of Public Safety, and we report to the Chief Director of Public Safety. The Office of Emergency Management is responsible to protect lives, property, the environment, and obviously the economy. We work to assist the emergency operations of governmental services to help protect, prepare, and respond to, and recover from, and mitigate the effects of major events and crisis situations. We are committed to communicating, coordinating, and collaborating with our local, state, and federal partners, as well as other stakeholders, to ensure the safety of the citizens. When making choices based on resources, the respective priority will be life safety, incident stabilization, property conservation, and restoration of normalcy. The Office of Emergency Management is complying with the National Incident Management System, as was described by Chief Griffin, and that provides a framework for local, state, and federal governments to work together to respond to domestic hazard, whether it's natural, man-made, or terror. We'll talk about the EOC, which is the Emergency Operations Center. The Office of Emergency Management personnel are responsible for maintaining the EOC. We're in a constant state of readiness and to establish the EOC operational procedures, protocols, and plans, and implementation of the overall emergency management program for the City of Cleveland. The Office of Emergency Management consists of 24/7 on-call professional emergency management personnel, and we've received specific training on emergency management programs and areas of Emergency Operations Center protocols. The City of Cleveland's Emergency Operations Center, it's a centralized facility, and it serves as the command center for all major events that occur in the City of Cleveland, and the EOC supports incident management activities of the on-scene incident commander and command staff. We have pre-planned events such as the St. Patrick's Day Parade, the Cleveland Marathon, and the 4th of July fireworks. In the event of an unplanned emergency, such as a train derailment, the Chief Director of Public Safety would communicate with the Office of Emergency Management to determine activation status and level of activation for the EOC. There are three levels of activation. There's monitoring, partial, and full activation, which includes internal and external partners. The primary activities that will occur within the EOC include but are not limited to situational monitoring, information analysis, and interagency resource coordination in support of the on-scene incident commander, and as you learned for a train incident, it would be the chief of fire. We have access to over 1,200 camera views throughout the city, and partners can utilize and view those incidents in real time through all phases of the event. Police, fire, and EMS dispatchers are present during an activation, permitting them to manage all of the safety operations of the incident directly from the EOC, and what that means is the daily operations will take place under their normal structure of the communications center. Periodic situation reports are issued to our internal and external agency representatives to keep informed of developments. If an incident, natural or man-made, exceeds the city's resources, assistance will be requested through mutual aid from regional agencies, the state of Ohio, and if required, federal agencies through the EOC. And now I'll talk about the City of Cleveland Emergency Operations Plan. It's called the EOP. The City of Cleveland's Emergency Operations Plan identifies potential hazards and jurisdictional vulnerabilities and establishes a framework to ensure that the City of Cleveland will be adequately prepared to respond and deal with the hazards threatening the lives and the property of its residents and visitors. The Office of Emergency Management is responsible for developing and updating the city's EOP. The EOP outlines the general responsibility of city departments and divisions in responding to an emergency. It also coordinates responses and recovery activities with voluntary organizations active in the community. This plan unifies the efforts of these groups for a comprehensive approach to reducing the effects of a disaster. The EOP addresses the phases of emergency management, which are prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. The plan integrates with and describes what the City of Cleveland will do to coordinate with Cuyahoga County, the state of Ohio, federal agencies, and natural resources to supplement the city's capabilities. The EOP has the basic plan, which provides a general overview for the City of Cleveland's preparedness and response strategies and outlines the city's overall approach to incident management. There are functional annexes, there's 16 of those. They identify lead and supporting departments or divisions responsible for a particular function, describes their roles and responsibilities, and discuss what must be done and how the incident is managed before, during, and after. An example of a functional annex is public health and their responsibilities during an incident. There's hazard-specific appendices, and there's 8 of those. They provide a detailed overview of hazard-specific roles and responsibilities for specific incidents. An example would be flooding, improvised explosive devices, extreme temperatures, and the rail incident appendix. So I'll talk about the rail incident appendix now. There are multiple active rail lines carrying freight and passengers through the City of Cleveland. Regardless of what is being transported, derailments and other rail incidents can occur. The Rail Incident Appendix addresses the city's mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery efforts in these situations. The appendix was developed to ensure that a process exists to manage the prompt and effective deployment of resources. Full activation of the EOC for a rail incident would involve internal and external partners. Those partners would be notified and report to the EOC, which is the Emergency Operations Center. Full activation would involve the Executive Policy Group consisting of the mayor and key chiefs and directors from safety, law, finance, communications, and others. Within the Rail Index Appendix, roles and responsibilities of various cities, departments, and divisions and outside agencies is identified and serve as a guideline for the agency. We may have to deviate that may be necessary to facilitate the most effective and efficient response possible, but it has to be done with the coordination of other entities to ensure that there's no duplication of efforts. The roles and responsibilities include mitigation and preparedness, and that includes developing standard operating procedures, training, and identification of the high hazardous routes that go through the city. Response, that includes deployment of tactical rescue and life safety operations, which Chief Luke will talk about in a minute, and the coordinated communications and coordination of resource needs, situational awareness updates and remediation. And the recovery aspect includes coordination of post-event impact assessments and assistance. So that's a brief overview of the Emergency Operations Plan. I'll turn it over to Chief Luke and the Fire Marshal, Dave Talbin, to go into their roles during the incident.
Thank you. The major difference that would be seen in a rail response in the city of Cleveland as opposed to what you saw in East Palestine would be related to capacity, the amount of resources that could be instantly deployed, and our support network. Here in Cleveland, we have a full career 24/7, 365 staffed responders with full capacity to respond to any technical incident that would come up, like a rail incident. So we have two technical rescue units that this is what they specialize in, this is what they train for. We also have a hazardous materials unit who can instantly conduct air monitoring, product ID, product sampling, and scene entry and decontamination. These are actions that in East Palestine, they were relying on the state and federal agencies to come in and back support them. Whereas here, we can instantly deploy those while still maintaining our emergency coverage for the rest of the city. We also can put more personnel on scene pretty much in under 12 minutes than you can with a part-time or volunteer fire department. We could have 45 firefighters on scene, assessing the incident and taking action to protect the citizens of the city. While on scene, they would also have the ongoing testing, evaluation of what's going on, how do we evacuate, and how do we integrate with our partner agencies, and if necessary, we can always call up our suburban partners to assist us in the response. We also have the ability, as it was just seen with the Emergency Operations Center, where the Emergency Operations Center can provide us support where we can more concentrate on the incident response as opposed to incident management.
Hello, good morning. Thank you. Dave Margolis, Director of Public Health. From our shop, we've got an incredible Office of Emergency Preparedness on our team, 2 members who have trained up our entire department through tabletop exercises, through real-life experience, most recently through the MPOX pandemic. We had a chance as a department to set up our partial activation of our Department Operations Center. Most notably, our team training the rest of us, and they're in the audience, help us to understand all of those acronyms on that first slide. Hopefully folks memorized all those because that might come up later. Our team is very closely involved with the Emergency Operations Center in developing those indexes and having those on their person as well. And our team coordinates closely with the Ohio Department of Health, the Ohio EPA, and a number of other agencies throughout our region to make sure that we're on top of the process that's happening to keep us safe.
Thank you. As illustrated by today's conversation, we recognize the importance of clear and responsible communication, both about an incident and our plans to respond in real time. So I'll ask Chief Johnson to provide an update on the city's plan, and Nicole Carlton to outline Code Red.
Good morning. So I would view the crisis communications plan as a supplement to the overall emergency operations plan. And I'm going to walk through the objectives of the plan and then the steps that we follow just at a very high level, and happy to provide additional detail for you. So the objectives of the plan are to provide the leadership, both council and the administration, a framework to execute timely and accurate communications during a crisis. The health and safety of the residents and our employees is our first priority. We want to ensure that everyone is aware of their potential role in executing this plan, ensure that we are transparent with the residents and key stakeholders, provide guidance on appropriate communications, content, and actions, and identify potential partners to enhance communication efforts. This could range from DCA, RTA, additional communications folks across the city, faith leaders, depending on the severity of the situation. So our first step is identifying the crisis situation. This can range from a high-level terrorist attack to a snowstorm and RTA delays. So once we identify what the situation is, then we assess the level. So the level could range from the highest level, which is 1, which would be a terrorist attack or a train derailment, to a level 4, which is what we typically deal with on a day-to-day, like a snowstorm or an RTA delay. So once we identify that situation, then we pull together an advisory team. This team may involve public safety, communications, chief of staff, a representative from council. It really depends on what the situation is. And then we figure out what support we need from a communications standpoint. Depending on the level of severity of the situation, we may need to call in the various PIOs from across the city. We would certainly involve city council communications folks. Then we ID our spokesperson. If it's a police-related situation, that's typically Chief Drummond. If it's a high-level situation, like a major crisis, that would be the mayor and probably council president together. Once we identify that spokesperson, then we figure out the information sharing hierarchy and what that phone tree looks like, just to make sure that everyone knows what's happening at the same time, so we can be clear and consistent with our messaging as it goes out. So then we work on our internal and external communications plans. You know, the residents are a very important audience, but so are our employees. Often our employees do not hear about situations in a timely manner, and we want to make sure that they get the information as soon as it's available to us. We have various methods to get this information out, including social media, robocalls. We have 311, who we provide talking points to, emails, newsletters, and then we do rely a lot on our community relations team and faith leaders across the city for, especially our elderly residents who may not be on social media, who may not go to the website and things like that. So we want to make sure that all this information is getting out to everyone. And then I think the most important part after a crisis has alleviated is to debrief. I think we often miss that step, and I think it's important to revisit the situation, evaluate what went well, what could be improved, and then recalibrate for the next time.
I'll talk a little bit about Code Red. Code Red is the city's mass communication service that can send messages via phone, text, or email to residents who have opted to sign in to receive those messages. And I think it's important they can go on the city's website to opt in so they are aware of when crisis hits and if you change phone numbers to keep that updated. We currently have about 250,000 individuals and businesses that are in the database that we have stored. The messaging, we have to it's not going to be immediate messaging because we don't want to get an influx of 911 calls. So we call it a protective action. We have to know what that will be, and that would come from the chief of fire, whether people are sheltering in place or evacuating. So once that is determined, then we can send messaging out, because if we just send out that there was a train derailment at a location, we're going to get influx of 911 calls and 311 calls trying to determine what to do. So it will be sent out as soon as we can figure out what the protective action is for residents. And then we'll talk about iPause. iPause is it's a FEMA system, and the Cuyahoga County Emergency Management has access to that, and we utilize them to get messaging out, and they have additional resources as well as putting that message out via TV. Once we determine what the messaging is, and we'll work with the communications team to make sure that it's clear, concise, and doesn't induce panic for those who are residents or visitors within the city.
At the top of today's conversation, you heard from our Chief of Government Affairs about some responsive advocacy that was done in response to the tragedy in East Palestine. But as demonstrated today, there's a number of ongoing coordination that needs to happen during a crisis. And so I'll ask Nicole to continue to talk a little bit about the coordination that happens throughout the government and then each of the individual subject matter leaders on how they interact with agencies and peers.
And I'll go over, as Chief Luke said, his responsibility as the incident commander is on scene and commanding from that point. The EOC supports the incident commander to make sure that we can get the resources that he needs on site. And we look at, initially, it's going to be our internal partners, and that very quickly happens. All the divisions that would support, whether it be public works, public utilities, and public safety, everybody within public safety to help him manage that scene. And then obviously we have other partners that we will work with. We have the Cuyahoga County Office of Emergency Management, and we use them as a process to help us with our regional and state requests for assistance. And then they go out to Ohio EMA and then obviously to FEMA. So the chain goes upward for us to get the resources we need. We coordinate with FBI, and they're the lead agency for rail incidents that involve criminal activity. The Federal Railroad Administration, I know that was talked about. The FRA is obviously involved with the investigation. The PUCO, that's the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, they are an enforcement branch of hazardous materials and shipments that make their way through on the highways, the railroads, and the shipping docks, and they assist with coordination and mobilizing the state resources to augment the fire chiefs and our local response, and they have technical and advisory services to help support the team that's on the site. The NTSB, they're the lead agency for rail incidents not involving criminal activity, but they can also support the criminal investigators with their expertise. Obviously, the private and public rail carriers, they can provide technical expertise, engineering, contracting, and they have legal and permitting, and they can provide briefings to the stakeholders. The Ohio EPA and the U.S. EPA, they provide support to the response personnel as requested, and they help to prioritize concerns related to spills and the means to remediate them, and early recommendations from them assist with a quicker recovery and remediation. The Northeast Ohio Regional District, they monitor the sewers. The U.S. Coast Guard is actually involved because they help monitor and protect the flow into the waterways. And long-term, we look at the resource centers for residents so that we make sure that they get the information that they need, and obviously coordinating with the Red Cross. And then I'll turn it over to Chief Luke and the Fire Marshal to talk about their coordination of resources.
Okay, good morning, everyone. All right, well, I'll give you a little rundown with who we work with when an incident does happen. You see hazmat type 1 team. Is everybody clear on what a type 1 team is? Okay. In 2006, the state decided they wanted to know what type of hazmat assets that were available in the state. So they decided to get every hazmat team to either be typed a 1, 2, or a 3. And that all depended on amount of equipment and how much manpower each team could supply in an incident. So obviously the type 1 being the largest, and the type 3, maybe a company with a meter or something really small. The hazmat TAC that meets in Columbus on a monthly basis, they kind of coordinate that through the county EMA. When this came out, we were looking at it and thought, well, we could be a type 1 team by ourselves with our manpower and the equipment that we had at the time. But if that's the case, you become a state asset and they can move you wherever they want to. And the chief at the time decided he'd like to keep us home in control. So we got together with the county hazmat teams. There's 3 others in our county. There's Southeast Chagrin, CERT, and West Shore. And what we decided to do is all 4 of us typed ourselves as type 2 teams. But then collectively together, under the county's umbrella, we have 2 type 1 teams available in Cuyahoga County with a collective effort of the 4 teams. All right. Again, that puts us under as a county asset, which helps out with keeping our equipment up to speed and everything else through the county. And then other standards that we have around the area, Lake County has a type 1 team, Summit County has a type 1 team. So we have other large groups of hazmat equipment that we can draw on if it need be. All right. We work hand in hand on a daily basis with Ohio EPA, U.S. EPA. We have different projects going on throughout the city pretty much all the time. training with the county EMA. We do a lot of joint trainings where we invite other teams in that we host at our academy. We also have our airport resources who have equipment that would be good to have in case something of that magnitude were to happen, and they're pretty close if we were to need them. If an event were to grow bigger than what we could handle at a Type 1 level, there's a National Guard, the 52nd in Columbus, and we also train with them on a yearly basis. We get together every now and then, and they would come up, but that would be about a 3 to 4 hour window before they could get here with all their equipment. So we'd have to keep things going in that time frame. There's things that go on that you're probably unaware of. There's a thing called a JHAT that we do. It's a joint hazard assessment team. Like on St. Patrick's Day, we had 2 JHATs just kind of perusing the city, and that's made up of an FBI agent, a person from the 52nd, as well as one of our hazmat specialists. That way, if anything looks out of kilter, they respond right away. They check it out. If need be, we'll create a response. If not, they just take care of it. And that goes on pretty much anytime there's a large event in the city, we're kind of checking to make sure that everything's okay. And we also have other area monitoring that we can do, that we could set up meters around the area. Like when we had the draft, we had meters all around the Brown Stadium that we were checking air quality throughout the event. Also, the sewer division, we work with them because obviously if there's any spills, gets in the sewer, we want to make sure our waterway is protected. So we're constantly in contact with them, making sure that we have everything followed up as far as that goes. Well, that's pretty much all the people that we work with on a daily basis. So.
At the Health Department, in addition to the aforementioned agencies that our Office of Emergency Preparedness partners with and coordinates with locally within the city departments that we coordinate with, I'll shout out our Division of Air Quality, which we do for the county. We are the Ohio EPA delegate. We have a branch of air monitoring that does ambient air monitoring for any type of catastrophes or just normal pollution monitoring that would happen in the county. And so that team coordinates closely with all the whole alphabet soup of agencies, and we're proud of the work they do.
With that, I'd like to thank Councilwoman Spencer and Cleveland City Council for organizing and inviting us to this conversation, and I just want to acknowledge our senior public safety leadership who answered the call today and continue to answer the call. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you so much. So we are going to go into a question and answer period, and I want to thank members of the administration for being at the table today and for preparing a detailed presentation on some complex issues. And so we've touched upon legal authority, we've touched upon infrastructure authority, emergency protocol, crisis communication plans, and government coordination. So there's a lot of content here. It is a bit daunting, but this is exactly why we're holding this hearing, so we can begin to, for our part as members of Cleveland City Council, better understand these systems. And with that, I do want to open it up to colleagues for questions. At the beginning of the hearing, I stated I was going to limit us to just a couple of minutes each and then put you back on the list. I will, I think what makes more sense here is I'm going to time us at 4 minutes each for questions, and then we can always add back if we need to. But first on my list then is Council President Blaine Griffin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I like the way that you chair meetings already with the 4-minute time limit. So just very quick, just 2 things that I really want to understand is, I heard you talk a lot about reactive, but how are we proactive in doing prevention? I know that Bessemer Avenue has probably the 7th worst intersection in the United States of America.
That's right.
How are we actually looking at some of those intersections and the hazard that they present, and they're actually going right through residential neighborhoods? So I wanted to make sure I asked that to start off with.
This has been designated an infrastructure question. All right, well, where there are safety concerns, With our intersections, like I mentioned before, we have a connection with the local railroad representatives, and in emergency situations, we can let them know of our concerns, and they will work with us. Typically, that response time is 1 to 3 days as far as any emergencies specific to what is in their right-of-way.
Okay.
We can make recommendations, but what is in their right-of-way, we have found is, and as we know from legal addresses before, is their responsibility. And that's kind of where we stand with it at the moment. I will ask our chief engineer, Tom, if he wants to add anything to that.
Best directory intersection, we applied for a federal grant, and the awards come out in June.
Okay.
I didn't hear that. What did you say?
They applied for a federal grant and the awards come out in June, so we'll
Okay.
hear June. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to respect the chair's timetable. The other thing that I have been, Chief, as well as all of our safety force folks, incident commands, they can transition to different levels from local to state to federal, and they don't always have to be government structures in place. Is there any time at all when the city of Cleveland may lose control of an incident and is turned over to the federal authorities, state authorities, or some other commission by the president?
Chair, to the councilperson, my full understanding is, short answer, no. In an event like this, we would establish what's called a unified command. So I would be the incident commander, but I would have people in conjunction with me, any federal agencies that would respond in, any state agencies that respond in, we would be in direct communication with each other. But the final calls on all incident actions or responses would still be mine.
Through the chair to Council President Griffin, that's correct. Under Revised Code 3780, the fire chief has control until he decides to relinquish it. And so he would maintain his authority and power to direct things on the ground, hopefully in collaboration with our state and federal partners.
Thank you. Through the chair, that was great information because I know that those incident command structures, according to FEMA, can change and be moved around depending on the seriousness of the catastrophe. Just in closing, I would just say the rail lines have gotten away with a lot for a long time, and I hope that you continue to press this issue. I'm glad that you and Councilwoman Moore decided to really take the lead on this. I believe that they've been one of the more negligent property owners in the city of Cleveland, just by the way of they even maintain bridges and overpasses when you have these dilapidated bridges with debris falling down. I just think that we need to have a better relationship with them in general. And then I do think that we need to have the churches, to Ms. Johnson, as well as some of the community organizations, as well as some affinity groups like LGBT Center, NAACP, Hispanic community, that can also make sure that if there is an emergency, that we have a complete communication plan to evacuate or make sure that we have a way to communicate. But thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a great meeting, and I do appreciate you and the administration pulling this together.
Thank you, Council President Griffin. On that point, I really want to loop back with Chief Davey across the table from me, also our Mayor's Office of Capital Projects at the table. So Norfolk Southern was invited to today's hearing. The Office of U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown provided council with the contact information for the individual who is in charge of all of Ohio and West Virginia. That's a pretty big realm of responsibility. They did initially reply to the email, but did not reply to the specific invitation to make a statement or participate in today's hearing. I think it bears noting that I don't know how much we can share at this juncture. My understanding, based off of Council President's question and the response from MOCAP, we know that we have relationships with some of the on-the-ground workers who handle the day-to-day. I think that one thing that I don't want to speak on behalf of the mayor's team, but one thing I think we all want to work towards is making sure the city of Cleveland has a clear point of contact, someone in an authority position at Norfolk Southern where we can effectively communicate our needs.
To the Councilwoman's point prior to today's conversation, we discussed needing to double back and make sure that we have deeper and clearer relationships with the senior leaders at both of the rail companies. And so we have begun that process, and I'll continue to work with the Councilwoman on ensuring that there is a clear and regular contact with those folks.
Chief, I just want to add to the chair, to the council, we have the same issue with CSX. Councilman Polensek last June 21st of 2022 sent an email to CSX's Director of State Relations, who covers Ohio and Michigan, and it was about maintaining the grass around Councilman, I believe it was 152nd Darwin Avenue, 146th Street, and a section on South Waterloo. It took almost 2 months before they responded, saying they would do a meeting, but then it took another 2 months for them to follow up, and all we got was apologies and delays. So I think one action item is a joint letter between the council and the administration saying we need a regular point of contact and someone that communicates on a regular basis and stay on them and hold them accountable for that. So to your point, the communication and even establishing a relationship has been extremely challenging. And Chief Thielen shared the same instances and experiences from her time at the Ohio Department of Transportation, so it's a common thread. Thank you.
Yeah, and Chair, if I can make a quick
on that point, go ahead, Councilman.
No, thank you, and Chief Puente, I think that's exactly right, and I think that's a really productive next step for both sides of the table, especially given the on-the-ground knowledge we have of our wards. You know, as we hear about Bessemer, as we hear about the train tracks in Lee Harvard, I have a bridge at Irma and East 71st Street that is chronically having issues, and I think one thing we could do is produce an assessment on our side of what we need from CSX and Norfolk Southern. So it's not the ask in that letter isn't just a point of contact, but it's what are our action items for this infrastructure.
Go ahead, Councilwoman Gray, a point on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, my point is the same as Councilwoman Mahler. I've been talking with Capital Projects since last year regarding the bridge on 93rd from 93rd and Yeki on over to Kennedy, on over to Steinberg, to Woodland as well. The bridge is crumbling real bad, and I've been working with them for since last year, August. That the constituents over there have been sending pictures, with concerns that it might crash along that line. So yes, that is a real problem with communication with them, because to this point, they really haven't responded with an accurate answer. Thank you.
Thank you. And to Chief Davey and Chief Puente, you can see that I think members of this body are readily make ourselves available to work on that type of communication. I would be remiss if I didn't state that I have some of our Ward 15 leaders in the audience today, resident advocates who we too, I think this is citywide, right? We all have a story. One of the stories in Ward 15 is the Lake Avenue Bridge, and it seems like a subtlety, but it's a huge impact for our residents. The sidewalks are impassable because of mud and debris flowing off of the bridge, which is the railroad's property, onto our public right-of-way, making it slippery and dangerous. Not to mention we've struggled with falling debris overhead. So I think this point about, for lack of a better word, a capital needs assessment or a survey of what needs attention is certainly on point. I really look forward to working with the administration. We look forward to working with you on that. With that, next on my list, I'm going to go back to Councilman Jones. I cut you short earlier in today's hearing, and so it's back to you, Councilman Jones.
I'm used to being cut short, but thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Councilwoman Jenny Spencer and Rebecca Maurer for putting together this sensitive subject matter. And, I'm not one that is going to mince my words for maybe some folks getting hurt feelings. At the end of the day, I think that what we are fundamentally here and what we should be asking for is regulations to be put in place. Regulations that should be put in place. Cleveland City Council passed a resolution condemning Norfolk Southern. Corporation for rerouting daily trains carrying highly toxic flammable crude oil and ethanol through the city of Cleveland without public notice. And strongly urge Norfolk Southern Corporation to immediately cease this rerouting, urging Norfolk Southern Corporation to withdraw its request to the Federal Railroad Administration to reduce the rail and traffic handling capacity of the only relievable route, which is to Chicago. Basically limiting and requesting for a limiting of hazardous materials to go through densely populated areas in the city of Cleveland. And so this council has went on the record in 2020 asking for that. And in part is because there was no public notice that we would be receiving toxic chemicals. So I want to start, Madam Chairwoman, in the questioning in terms of our legal authority as in our municipal corporation boundary. Do we have any kind of leverage as relates to limiting and densely populated populations like what we saw in the southern part of Ohio, this railroad from being able to carry such toxic chemicals?
Through the chair to the councilman, some but not a lot, and it's narrowly tailored. So I'm going to let Assistant Director of Law Tomasello speak more specifically on the issue. But we are not permitted to directly regulate the railroads. So what we have to do is we have to legislate around with respect to information and other pieces. And some of these are areas where I think there is ambiguity in the law, and we want to look at whether we can take an aggressive position on that. And I'd like Assistant Director of Law Tomasello to talk a little bit more about where those boundaries are.
Through the chair to Councilman Jones. There is an exception in the Federal Railroad Safety Act and in the Hazardous Materials Transportation Act for states and localities to adopt and enforce their own rules that actually would regulate rail transportation if the local rule, or the state rule, quote, is necessary to eliminate or reduce an essentially local safety hazard, unquote. But this is a very difficult standard to meet. We actually met that once many years ago when the Truckers Association challenged our hazardous material law in our fire code that prohibits hazardous materials from being trucked through the downtown public square area Monday through Friday during business hours. They said it was preempted by the federal law. We argued in the law department that it was not, because public square is unique in that it is, at that time, was highly populated, and this was narrowly tailored to be only enforced during business hours and on weekdays, and we won that in front of what's called the RSPCA, which is a division of the Department of Transportation that looks at preemption challenges. So it is possible, but it is very difficult. Because the idea behind the federal laws is to have consistency among the regulations across the country so that when transporters are going through different cities, they don't have to comply with different regulations every time. But if we were to identify some unique local safety hazards that are necessary, we might be able to withstand a preemption challenge.
Thank you. And Councilman Jones, I'm holding us to 4 minutes per council member for our questioning, but I can add you back on the list. If you'd like to
Is
ask
my
more
minutes
questions.
are over with that quick?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, but that was 4 minutes.
Well, Jesus.
I know.
Okay.
I'm going to add you. Can I add you back once we go
Yeah,
through
you
our-
can, but since I'm down this route, can I continue?
If you'd like a point on that, please go ahead. Is
Right.
it related to the, yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
Here's the issue. If we're going to really talk about this issue and come up, because see, I'm not here to waste my time. So I'm here to really talk about it grab the bull by the horn and tear him down to the ground. And so what I would suggest is that, a lot of times when we talk about the law, and then we have existing laws in the past that, well, it's already the president that's here. That doesn't stop the other party from changing the president and putting new rules in place. So as Democrats, as we sit here at this table, that's what we are, I hope, most of us are. These regulations have been taken away that help to protect the safety of residential areas and communities, which is important to us. Protecting our citizens and making sure that we limit chemicals from coming into our territories. Who knows what they're delivering on these systems that we're not aware of. And my understanding, Madam Chairwoman, to the Director of Law, is that the Norfolk Southern rerouted their chemicals to come through the city of Cleveland. So they have another capacity, Madam Chairwoman, to send this in a different direction. The question is, we need to get down to understanding what that is. And with all due respect to the law department, this is our municipal corporation. We have to fight for it. If we don't fight for our city in such a way, with such an intensity, then we're going to have anything running through it. And so my suggestion would be, how do we move in the direction, even if it's something small, begin to build upon that, and then each year talk about how we can add a little bit more onto that. But my suggestions, and if you could put me back on the back end, Madam Chairwoman, is how do we reroute the chemicals currently coming through the city of Cleveland, or how can we give notice, or how we make them to give us notice when those systems are coming through our city. If we don't challenge that here at this table, then, I mean, what are we doing? So thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I would look for a response.
Through the chair to Councilman Jones, if I understand, part of your suggestion is that the city passed laws in the event that there is some change to the federal preemption piece, and in the event that there's a different administration, that those would then become effective. If I'm hearing you correctly with respect to that, this body, of course, has the power to pass ordinances as it sees fit. Those are likely to be challenged, but if the idea is to have them on the books in case there's a change of law, we just need to be aware of that and understand the consequences of that. With respect to informational pieces, I think that is something that we need to look at. I think there's a possibility that we can legislate that in a way that is consistent with federal preemption. But as with many things in the law, the answer is it depends. So we'd have to look at exactly what the proposal is and then give you our view and evaluation. The other piece is that I'm conscious and aware of the fact that this is a public meeting. So I don't want to say anything that might undermine our legal position later on. If we want to take an aggressive view of something, I don't want to tell you in this forum that that's a risky piece. Do you understand what I'm saying?
In that, with this, Madam Chairwoman, to the law department, I would suggest that we lawyer up. We're one catastrophe from being like the city in the southern part of the state that would have this issue. I would want to see Cleveland on the front end fighting. And I would ask that our legal department begin the proposition, Madam Chairwoman, with all due respect, to look at every legal possibility and ways and means to reroute the chemicals in our city. We see that right now, currently, when we read all the news reports, that all the regulations have been changed. We don't see anything really fundamentally happening on the federal level. And Madam Chairwoman, for the protection of our corporation in the city of Cleveland, I think it's our due diligence to keep on fighting. And I think that we should, my suggestion would be, how do we lawyer up and begin the proposition to fight this tooth and nail here, in addition to maybe even suing Norfolk Southern for bringing their chemicals through our territories.
Thank you, Councilman Jones. I just bears noting that we knew we would come to today's informational hearing with a lot of information being shared, but a lot of follow-up to do and a lot of questions. I'm looking down at our policy and research team, and I know that there's going to be a lot of follow-up coming out of today. One thing I will say is we were not able to get on a call with them before today's hearing, but one of the next steps, and I would be happy to have you join me, Councilman, join any council member who wishes to do that. The Surface Transportation Board, it is our understanding that they are the federal body that would have, if the 2020 resolution, the statements in that are accurate, that is the body that would have allowed the rerouting of trains through Cleveland. So we need to backtrack a little bit, unravel, look at history, look at what happened. So there's going to be a lot of next steps coming out today, but I appreciate your commitment and advocacy and the great questions. So,
Madam Chairwoman, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I would certainly love to be a part of that.
terrific. Thank you. Go ahead, Chief Puente, on that point.
To the councilman, I just want to add that one of the recommendations the councilman provided is exactly what the Mayors and Managers Association is also requesting, and in their in-person meetings, that the railroads are required to provide counties, cities, and fire departments in advance, week in advance, a list of all hazardous materials that are being transported. So that's something they're going to continue to advocate, and we'll work with Councilman Jones to make sure he's plugged in around that advocacy as well.
Yeah, I think Cleveland City Council would like to step up for that advocacy as well. Thank you. Okay, next on my list is Councilman Mike Polenzek.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and to my honorable colleagues. And I want to thank you for having this hearing today. But I will say, I believe 4 minutes per member is not adequate. So I wanted to state that for the record. Let me just go back to the presentation and to the information. First of all, I appreciate all the information that's been provided to us by the administration. I want to go back to the legal authority page. First of all, I want to remind not only the administration but members of council, council has a subpoena authority. We have subpoena power. And I know I was the last council president to utilize it, so I know its effectiveness, and it's there. It's a part of our authority. So anyone who does not wish to appear here, we can't subpoena them to appear before this body. So I will state for the record that as long as I've been in city council, I have fought with the railroads. As long as I've been in city council, I have fought with New York Central, then Conrail, now CSX, and Norfolk Southern. So I have Norfolk Southern, CSX, and the short line, plus I have the massive historic Collinwood Yard, which has been a staging ground for putting trains together, and I have we have two massive fuel oil tanks, and when I say massive, I mean massive tanks right on 152nd Street, because that was their refueling area, because the Collinwood Yard was the largest yard between New York and Chicago. So that was where they did their refueling, and that's where they did their diesel repair and locomotive repair. So that's over 200 acres of rail yard just at 152nd Street. So when I look at the legal authority that we have, and I want to look at not only legal authority but infrastructure authority. Can somebody explain to me, under city's responsibility, right away, road maintenance on top of rail bridges? Can somebody tell me what that means?
Right, maintenance on top of bridges. If there is a road, any kind of covering, asphalt, or something on top of the bridge.
I understand that, but the way road maintenance on top of rail bridges, so that's all we're responsible for is the roadway, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the railroads are responsible for the bridges. The railroads are responsible for their tracks within the municipality, correct? Through the chair?
That's
to whoever. So here's our challenge, and Ryan touched on it, and I appreciate the effort that Ryan did trying to deal with, because each of the railroads have a lobbyist in Columbus. And when we talk about lobbyists, the railroads are wired into Columbus, just as First Energy was wired into Columbus. And we saw the effectiveness of First Energy. they got whatever they want, and the railroads get whatever they want. So the problem is, as I've learned here a long time ago, people with fat checkbooks have power. And the railroads have utilized their power, and through their political action arm, have been very effective in controlling what happens in Columbus. Here's our challenge here, and it's not even so much directed to this administration, because you're still relatively new, even though the honeymoon is over after the first of the year, as I've learned in all the years here. That's right, you're here a year, the honeymoon's over, is that the city has been ineffective in policing the health codes. The city has been ineffective of citing the railroads for the conditions of the bridges. I want someone to show me when was the last time we put any of the railroads in housing court. I don't think anybody could tell me. Because that's exactly. We have never aggressively pursued the railroads because, man, they got attorneys, they got this, they're loyaled up, they got the biggest law firm. But the fact of the matter is, they have to maintain the bridges. They have to maintain their tracks. And when you sit there at a crossing and you see the tracks going blah, 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 blah. I mean, you know the tracks are not tied down. They're moving. When you look at the right-of-ways, they on each side of the track, they have a right-of-way that is supposedly under their control. Yet look at the junk and debris dumped along their railroad, their rail lines that they don't address. They will not address. So my brothers and sisters at this table and to the administration, I think what we've got to do is take an aggressive policy toward the railroads as it pertains to maintaining their bridges and maintaining their tracks. And when they don't cut their grass, which they don't, for until the summer's virtually over and the grass is 4 and 5 feet tall, and I have to write hate letters to their lobbyists in Columbus, who just ignores them because he knows his butt is never going to be hauled into court in Cleveland. Until that changes, we're not going to get the respect that we need here at the table, and the city administration will not get the respect. And so the greatest concern I have, besides the appearance of their properties and health and safety conditions, and I don't know if I'm close to my 4 minutes, but to the first responders, that's my greatest concern. The first responders, should there be a car derail in Cleveland, and it's not properly labeled, we're putting our EMS, our fire, and police in great harm and jeopardy. And so whatever we can do collectively and with state officials and now federal officials to make sure that those cars, especially the tanker cars, are adequately labeled, to me is a big issue. I want our first responders to know what they're going into. And what I read is that the first responders down in New Palestine, they didn't know what they were responding to, because the cars were not properly labeled or didn't have to be labeled. That's what I read anyway. Chief, is that correct?
My understanding is yes, you are correct, Councilman.
Okay, so that's I think my biggest concern. We got to make sure that cars that are coming through our city are properly labeled, and that the tracks that they're riding on and the bridges that they're crossing are properly maintained. And then all the other ancillary stuff, the high grass, the weeds, all the other stuff, the illegal dumping on their property that they will not address. We have got to the law director, we got to take them into court. That's right. If Mrs. Jones don't cut her grass, she's in housing court. If CSX doesn't cut their grass and maintain their property, should be in housing court, or Norfolk Southern. And the issue with Norfolk Southern trains, Madam Chairperson, through the city, 30 years ago, we fought this issue about going in excess of 35 miles an hour through the city. They were just plowing through the city like there's no tomorrow. And there was a gentleman, I'll never forget, now Councilman Harrison's ward, a retired police officer, how he got the radar gun, but he stood out there with a radar gun, again on the north side of Euclid, north side of the tracks, as they were going through what they call the Euclid Green area, and he was with the radar gun, these trains are just blowing through. But again, the city was not enforcing it. So I'm going to stop at that point, Madam Chairperson. The city, the administration has got to take an active role against them. They got to be held accountable for the condition of their properties, their tracks, their bridges. They're not being held accountable. And until that day comes, they're not going to respect us, and their lobbyists in Columbus are going to thumb their nose at us, as they do. That's my position. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you, Councilman Polensek. I see your point about 4 minutes being a short period of time to express a lot of information for sure. Is anyone on the other side of the table prepared to share perspective on the enforcement question that Councilman Polensek is raising? Can we use the existing jurisdiction we do have to bring them into housing court, for example, or to enforce any of this?
Through the chair to the councilman, first of all, thank you for bringing this to my attention. And my understanding is that you're correct, that in the almost 200-year history of the city, we have never enforced these laws against the railroads. But your point is an important one, which is that these affect our citizens. And so I can tell you I'm going to take an aggressive look at this and see whether we can use our nuisance laws to enforce these against the railroads. That has not been done before, but that's why there's change, and that's why we have to respond to new changes.
Glad.
And if I may, Councilman,
yes.
Assistant Director of Law Tomasello would also.
Yeah, surely.
Yes, through the chair. We have tried to use our nuisance laws. In fact, in Councilwoman Spencer's ward, when there was a pile of Norfolk Southern creosote-soaked railroad ties that was affecting a local business, the law department worked with the Air Pollution Division, and we issued an order ordering them to move those ties. And our MOCAP division even told the railroad, there's a property near you that's vacant where you could move those ties, you know, for your work that you're going to do in the future, where it won't be a nuisance to the local business. And they were very arrogant, and they sent a letter challenging us, saying that we could not enforce any of our laws based on preemption. And we went back and said, yes, we can, because these are health and safety laws that are incidental to rail transportation, and we are permitted under federal law to do that. So the question was, you know, how much could we fight them with our resources? So the next thing we did is we tried to go to the PUCO, which provides for like a mediation process. And unfortunately, the PUCO was not very helpful. The PUCO sent out an inspector, you know, who put out a very kind of watered down report. And I'm not sure they really have enforcement authority. I have read that their enforcement authority is preempted by the federal law. I'm not that familiar with PUCO law, but I think there might be an avenue there that needs to be strengthened. And, you know, I would hope that in this federal law, this bipartisan law, that the exemption be strengthened to recognize the city's powers, the local powers to do incidental regulation, so that the railroads acknowledge that they have to keep the areas near the tracks safe, clean, free from air pollution hazards and health hazards and so forth.
Yeah, Madam Chairperson, we all know the PUCO. What if they set Randozzo out, or whatever his name, when they got the $4 million from First Energy to do the inspection? The fact of the matter is, we know, it goes back to that fat checkbook. We know they've controlled the PUCO. We know they've controlled the State House, the Ohio legislature, and unfortunately, the citizens pay a price for that. So I appreciate your explanation on that. But again, I'm looking forward to the law director. Maybe we all sit down and figure out another strategy against these guys, because what they've done to our city and throughout the state is absolutely outrageous. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilman Polensek, and to Assistant Director of Law Tomasello. We would gladly work with you. We do intend to follow up with the office of Senator Sherrod Brown in terms of any additional. We know what's included in the Railway Safety Act of 2023. There may be additional amendments we wish to suggest, and perhaps we can work collaboratively on that in terms of what else does Cleveland need that may not be included, so we can add that. I love your suggestion and we'd love to follow up on that. Thank you. Next on my list is Councilman Kevin Bishop.
All right, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'll be brief. I got a couple things, Madam Chairwoman. I guess listening to the presentation from the doctor, the first doctor that came up about the mood of the railroads and that their decision-making is driven by profit, and hearing Councilman Palensik's synopsis of the reach of the railroads and their influence in Washington and the State House, I think, and then evidence by the federal authorities is not here today. I think I can kind of get the tone of the regulatory part of this discussion. So I want to kind of pivot to what my concerns and what we can do as a city. Number one, I have about 12 railroad crossings in my community through the city streets. And I have received a call from a resident about the safety arms or the safety guards not coming down, or the lack of safety guards at my railroad crossings. So I'm very much concerned about that, and for the safety of the community. These trains that's going through our neighborhood is a convoy it's a transportation convoy. It's a dangerous transportation convoy with God knows what's on these trains. And to have just a few folks, human manning these trains, I think it's going to be an accident sooner or later. So I think we have to prepare for this. And in lieu of that, I'm asking the administration to come up with some kind of evacuation plan for my community, like a fire drill. As far as, if we have an accident, what do you do? Where do you go? Who do you call? I live 2 football fields from about 2 football fields from a train track. And if we had an accident in my community, I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know where to go. So if I can communicate back out to my community, if we have an accident like in East Palestine, what to do, I would appreciate that, Madam Chairwoman. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Bishop. Is there any comment from the administration in terms of, I know we heard from Ms. Carlton about the emergency operations plan. We heard from our fire marshal and Chief Luke that these are ever evolving, right? But it's one thing I want to reference back early in this conversation. I think it was Chief Luke who mentioned the term tabletop exercise. For the viewing public, can you define what that is? Just so we have that additional context, and I'll come back to Councilman Bishop's point.
Thank you, Chair. A tabletop exercise is basically you are given a hypothetical situation, and you have at literally a table individuals that represent the resources that you would bring to bear. So for the upcoming tabletop exercises that we have with FEMA, I will most likely have my entire command staff there. FEMA will give us a scenario. They will say you have a train derailment. They might give us a train manifest that lists the chemicals that's on the train, and then they will give you a location where it is. The key to the exercise is you don't have time to plan this. They give it to you right there, and you are supposed to then go walk through the exercise of your response as if it was actually occurring. The benefit of the exercise, it shows your weak points, it shows the holes in your operational response that you might have. It's a non-punitive way to see where you're weak, where you can improve, and you just keep going through these tabletop exercises to exercise your contingency plans for situations like this.
Thank you, Chief Luke. So knowing that our emergency operations plan is updated, is frequently updated, an accurate way to describe it, that it's a living document that gets updated.
To the Chairwoman, yes, we are currently, is being updated actually this year, and we're in the process of distributing it to the divisions that have roles in it. So it is currently being updated. It's about every 4 years.
Okay, so the emergency operations plan is being updated. A side question to that, going to Councilman Bishop's point, is has this derailment shed light on additional adjustments that might be needed. But then I think your other point, Councilman Bishop, I think goes to what Chief Johnson was referencing earlier and what Dr. Ock brought up, which is how do we get the word out to our residents? And I thought it was particularly poignant. Dr. Ock mentioned the elderly, non-digital natives, people who may be harder to reach in the event of emergency. So I think I can speak for all of us in saying what Councilman Bishop described would be a challenge in any of our neighborhoods. We are not able to fluently convey at this point of time what is our emergency operations plan and how residents would be notified.
To the chairwoman, there is a plan, and it depends on what is happening at the incident, and that is based on what the incident commander, which would be the fire chief. So it depends on what the matter is. Do we need people to shelter in place and not go down to the scene? Do we need to evacuate? We do have a sheltering annex that is part of the emergency operations plan, that if people need to be sheltered and moved, that we would enact that plan and use the resources that are around there. And I would love to say, yes, you can go to this specific point in the event of X, Y, or Z happens, but we don't know what the radius would be, so the hypotheticals are what we talk about in the tabletops. Is it a 1 mile radius, a 2 mile radius? We do have, through aging, I know they are part of Code Red getting messaging out, but as in East Palestine, I think they went door to door knocking because it was in the middle of the night, and we would have to enact certain things if we need to evacuate the residents. So it's case dependent, and it's based on what action we need the residents to do, and that is based on the incident commander, which would be the fire chief. And I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thanks, Councilman Bishop. Next on my list, I have Councilman Charles Slife.
Thank you. And you know, I smiled, Madam Chair, when Ms. Tomasello referred to the railroads as arrogant, because I cannot think of a worse corporate partner than the railroads. And I will share it offline because it's a little bit of colorful language, but there's actually a fun nickname for Norfolk Southern that relates specifically to this phenomenon, but I probably shouldn't put it on TV 20 where my mother can see it. Just generally, and this is railroad incidents, any incidents, can we make sure that whatever talking points come from emergency management communications also come to council and to our executive assistants? Just because people often presume that there's some sort of red phone, and we'll start getting calls or texts in the middle of the night, and we're like, I'm at home trying to eat a quesadilla, and people are asking me about an incident. I just don't know. So it would be helpful to be able to make sure that we're clued in. I know we are pushing people towards 311. That's good, but there's still going to be, I think, a time where people are accustomed to reaching out to council, if only because the council member is the person you bump into at the grocery store. Lots of great information today. I think that there's still a lot of information that we still need from the federal government, especially pertaining to their regulations on slowing hazardous trains, routes through urban areas. I think we all presume that the East Palestine train came through Cleveland. We're not specifically sure which track, but it's obviously an area of concern. A couple points of homework I have for the administration. When I was a kid, the train track that parallels Detroit and Clifton all the way out to Lorain County had trains on it every half hour, it seemed. I remember going to my grandparents' constant trains. And my understanding is maybe 20 years ago or so, most of those trains were pushed onto what is now the freight line that goes through West Park because of complaints about train noise from West Shore communities. That's, as I understood it, as a kid and a teenager. I want to understand what happened there and why more trains are now coming through, the West Park neighborhood. Communities like Olmsted Falls and Berea have had to spend millions of dollars building new bridges, grade separated crossings because of the increase in traffic. So if it was done on that line, is it something that we could try to replicate within Cleveland? I don't know, but I think it's worth investigating. Something else, a couple years ago, I was trying to get a sense of how property taxes are, like how each ward kind of plays into the whole property tax conversation. So I was using Neo Can Do, and one of the things I noticed that at the time there were some railroad properties with significant property tax delinquencies. I want to say into the six figures. When I was sitting here on my phone trying to kind of recreate that, a lot of the railroad parcels on the county auditor website are newly created parcels. As of last year, they actually come up and say, this is a newly created parcel. For more information, contact the fiscal office. So I'm not able to go back and see that those historic tax bills just because I don't know what they did. But if they are not paying property taxes, I would hope that the law department can pursue them rather aggressively. And then a final question. The lift bridge that's just about a half mile west of here, where the railroads cross the Cuyahoga River right at the mouth, is that bridge, I know the lift bridges that do take cars are owned by the city and or the county. Do we know who owns that bridge?
I don't know, but I will.
Okay.
I will let you know.
And my follow-up question is, I know in the summer the port has shifted towards a policy of keeping the bridge up for recreational boat traffic, and whereas previously the status quo was down, and then they would periodically lift it, they switched it to up and lower it when trains come through. I ask because we might not be able to directly limit speeds, but I can tell you that if you are driving on the West Shoreway and you see a train stopped, it's usually because the lift bridge is up. And when that lift bridge goes down, it takes a while for that train to get back up to speed. So if there's ways that we can essentially compel trains to have to go slower by working with the county or the port or whomever as it pertains to that lift bridge, I think that would be perhaps a way that we could slow these trains, because when I'm standing on the Triscuit train platform, they'll fly through it. It seems 70 miles an hour. So it's pretty terrifying. I'll actually share a picture of being on the Rapid, and there's this double stacked freight train 10 feet away from where I'm sitting, so next passenger rail. So I would like for us to look into that and understand that, especially because that lift bridge, had that derailment happened at that bridge, we're very proud of our river not catching fire anymore, but also that is very near to our water intake, and that begins to have regional ramifications for our regional water system. So with that, I think that is everything that I had, and I'm trying to stick to the 4 minutes. But yeah, come find me afterwards for the fun nickname for Norfolk Southern. So thanks.
Through the chair to the councilman, we will follow up with individual departments and work with your policy team to get you those answers. Thanks.
Thank you, and I want to make a point on that. Councilman Polenzek had, I think, an excellent suggestion following Councilman Sleif's comment, which is, this may be most appropriate for MOCAP, but we'll let you all decide. Is it possible to get, or do we already have, a list of all bridges owned by these rail companies? I think this is part of us understanding holistically the capital needs assessment, the capital repairs assessment notion that we all want to get to, because it affects neighborhoods so acutely. It would be very beneficial to understand what precisely are their property holdings when it comes to bridges in the city of Cleveland. So, thank you. And actually, I wanted to do one more follow-up on Councilman Sleif's point, again, to the speeds. We've discussed the difficulty. I think I'm looking at our policy and research team. I think we still need a basic understanding of, does any law, whether federal, our own, dictate speeds for rail as they go through urban neighborhoods? Are there speed limit changes like you might see on a city street? And I think we even lack perhaps that basic understanding right now. Does anyone have a comment on that?
So City Ordinance 631, I believe it's 01, regulates speeds within the city of Cleveland. However, certainly they claim that is preempted by federal law, and the case involving the city of Pequot would suggest that. So any regulation about speeds within the city will be determined by federal law.
Thank you. So again, looking at our policy and research team, I think it would be of interest as we go back and look at the Federal Railway Act of 2023, I believe speed limit is part of, included in that bill, but that's another one to double check as we go back and consider what additional advocacy Cleveland may wish to do in regards to federal regulation. Thank you. Okay, next on my list is Councilwoman Rebecca Moore.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you for convening us today for this important conversation. I first of all just want to say no one likes to be thinking about a worst case scenario, but if you have to be thinking about a worst case scenario, it's great to be surrounded by incredible professionals who are dedicated to preparing for the moment that all of us hope never happens. So I want to say thank you to everybody here. I think knowing the level of depth and training that you all go into, I know gives me a level of comfort. I hope it gives our residents a level of comfort. And I think we do have, it's clear that we're here to hold the railroads accountable and make sure that they hold up their end of the bargain to keep our city safe, and we have work to do on our end. But I want to really express my gratitude to our first responders for sharing the level of detail that you've shared today. And my question goes to, we are held up to various national standards, the National Incident Reporting System. We do the tabletop exercises that FEMA brings in. But of course, we know our city best, and we know, the dangers that we have in our neighborhoods, things like the fuel station that Councilman Polensek mentioned. I would be remiss as the Ward 12 councilperson to not talk about the Industrial Valley, and particularly the 870-acre Cleveland Works facility, one of the largest operating steel mills with everything from blast furnaces to zinc hot dips, right next to a rail yard. And tragically, there was a fatality in a collision between a truck and a train down in the mill just a couple of weeks ago. And so I wanted to ask through the chair to the table whether particularly risk-prone locations such as the mill are discussed in depth in the emergency preparedness, and whether your team has at least a working knowledge of that extended campus in case something ever goes wrong down there, through the chair.
We'll take that. Sure.
Through the chair to the councilperson. With the mill, there are people at the mill, like a rescue team, and we do have a process when something does happen where we meet with the people from the mill so we can get to the location as quickly as possible. Because obviously, like you say, the size of the mill to drive through there, it's kind of, you can get lost pretty quick.
Yeah.
So we set up a system where we will get quick access as soon as possible. We're constantly watching the area. We have a real good rapport with the folks that are on site. If they do have some type of release or a spill of any kind, we're notified right away. The EPA is notified right away. We go down, we check everything out, make sure everything's up to speed. So.
Great, thank you. My residents are also have very good ears for the booms and pops that come from the mill, and so I know that Cleveland Cliffs has when it used to be ArcelorMittal, used to be LTV, used to be Republic Steel, there was never a community point person, and I applaud Cleveland Cliffs on putting in a community point person who folks can go to for some of those questions. And I know that one of my long-term jobs is to work with the Department of Health and Air Quality to help residents gain an understanding about what it means to live next to the mill and next to the highways that we have in Ward 12. So thank you for the questions, and again, I look forward to working together to make sure that these railroads and rail lines through our city are as safe as possible.
Great, thank you so much. Councilman Joe Jones asked to be put back on the list, so he is back on the list.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. A lot of times, sometimes when we have these hearings, we won't be able to have everyone be for a longer periods of time. But sometimes these hearings, and I know in the past that when we've had hearings, particularly on this particular subject matter in days of past, when Norfolk Southern was requesting to merge, the city of Cleveland and others had to check off on they're being able to be allowed to do that. And I think in those days, and I'm not sure, if we could ask our staff if they could look into this, what was the resources for the city of Cleveland to have those two, Norfolk Southern and another railroad company, to merge. What was that agreement? And I think that we should start there. One of the things, Madam Chairwoman, I think that's really important when we have hearings such as this is sometimes it may take a little bit longer for members of council, but all of us have really great ideas, and sometimes sitting at the table and hammering that out. So it's like the kink in the fabric of the physical system of our corporation, and sometimes we need to massage that bump out. And I think that in that massaging of that bump out, we will begin to relieve the situation, the stress, and then begin the proposition, Madam Chairwoman, to put in rules, regulations, processes, and policies that will keep our citizens safe, as well as being a role model of a standard of law that can also help not only the citizens of Ohio, but that other states around and cities around can use the city of Cleveland as the model piece in terms of making sure and requiring that these regulations be put in place in order to serve and preserve life. And I think that at the end of the day, when we look at what has happened in the southern portion of our state, my heart goes out to the families, to the citizens, to the young people who have been negatively impacted. And Madam Chairwoman, make no mistake about it, that could have happened here in the city of Cleveland. And had that would have happened in the city of Cleveland, we would have been in a much more serious situation. So I believe that we ought to have the offensive capacity with beginning the proposition of looking at ways and means to lawyer up and find ways to fight and be a major part in whatever regulations will be laid down on the federal levels as well as on the state law. My colleague Mike Polensek, Madam Chairwoman, outlined the proposition of the powers of the council, and that is having the authority of subpoena power. So I would suggest, Madam Chairwoman, in this particular instance, we use that authority if we cannot bring those who are the heads of this corporation to our table. They should meet with us, because the incident that happened in the southern portion of the state, again, could have happened here because those lines came through our city. And I'm so appreciative, Madam Chairwoman, that you've had the wisdom and the foresight of saying, hey, we need to talk about it. But we should just not just talk about it, Madam Chairwoman, we should hold them accountable. And so if we have to utilize that subpoena power, let's do that. Let's bring them to the table, and then that's how we begin the proposition of ironing this physical bump in the road out, so that not only do we keep our citizens safe, but technically speaking, it appears that we will be keeping all of the state of Ohio safe. So we have to set the tone and the standard here. So the first point would be how we reroute, and I will send this in writing to all the council members and to the administration, how do we reroute the trains carrying high toxic materials through the city of Cleveland and highly dense populations. We need to prohibit certain toxic materials and hazardous materials from ever coming within our territory, and we need to fight on it. Even if we lose, we need to get back up and fight again. One of the things I've learned about the Republican Party is if they lose, they get back up and fight again. If they lose, they get right back up and try something else. If they lose, they get right back up and fight again. So we're the only ones that if we lose, we start to having some stuttering moments about what the state of Ohio's laws are about or what the local laws are about. None of that matters if we're not fighting for our citizens. So we have to have the same get up, the same drive, the same go. Every day we wake up, it's a new day of how we're going to put the rules and regulations in place to protect our municipal corporation. And that is the kind of fire that we need to have. And if we have that kind of fire, then no one's going to come into the city of Cleveland and disrespect our population. That could have happened here. So that's the reason why when I sit here at this table, I'm very concerned, because this council had the wisdom 2 years ago in the COVID to pass a regulation or pass a resolution that had no binding power to say you did not even give us the notification that you're going to reroute and put toxic hazardous materials through our densely populated areas. So we know, Madam Chairwoman, that they can reroute this. We need to challenge them to make sure they reroute this. And I did also put the bullet point of hiring attorneys and lawyering up. We also need to hold community citizens meetings in our neighborhoods. I'll work with you, Madam Chairwoman, to do that. I want to do it in my neighborhood. I know that we will get a population of citizens that are coming out, because we know that the railroad location that we are not maintained. So part of this will be aggressive maintenance of the railroads in our city. We should be relentless. If we just have to hire one person and that's all they do all day long is go after the railroads, then let's go after them. Let's make them feel our corporation when they come into our boundaries. Let them know that we are awoke and we're going to hold them accountable. If we do that here in this city, Madam Chairwoman, it will have an impact. It will make a difference. And I appreciate you, and I just want to say to our attorneys who are here, I think we have, first I want to commend our staff, Mrs. Sabin, Mr. Torben, and Mrs. Jessica Columbia for putting the presentation together here, as well as getting information to me quickly on the railroad location in my neighborhood and who to hold accountable. So I will be giving them a phone call tomorrow and asking them to clean up their railroad sites where there's illegal dumping. And Madam Chairwoman, I want to say to you that as I looked at my route, the railroads that come through us, they're not maintained. I looked them on an aerial view. And so my next question is, Madam Chairwoman, to the director of anyone on the administration side. I know my colleague said that you have 1 year and a honeymoon is over with. I will say this, the administration has gotten their first year. I know that you cannot walk on water. And I know that a lot of the people that, and this is no excuse though, a lot of the people that work for the administration are people who work for the previous administration. And then some of those people who work for the previous administration also work for the administration before that. So, but this is just to say what he's saying, just to kind of take the edge off a little bit. We are looking over here. We do want you to do something about these issues. Unfortunately, they were not met and held in the previous administrations. There's only one mayor I know that did hold Norfolk Southern accountable. And his name is Mike White. And he was able to get at least $4 million once we do the research for that merger coming into the city. But I do want to say this, is that we need your help to lawyer up, and I'd like to hear a response from our Director of Law. I just want to thank him and the administration for being here and bringing all their safety forces here. But I think having an offensive strategy would best serve the citizens of this city. And Madam Chairwoman, I rest and I send it back over to you, but I'd like to hear a response from the administration.
Please go ahead, and thanks, Councilman Jones. We were at time, but I also want to say that I look forward to working with you on next steps, but go ahead.
Through the chair to the councilman, let me first say I think this has been a very helpful meeting, and I want to thank you, and I want to thank Councilman Polensik specifically about thoughts on how to bring the railroads to account. As my colleague, Assistant Director Tomasello said, the railroads are amazingly arrogant, and I think I may be one of the few attorneys who has sued the railroads, and it arises actually out of a case, and I'll take 90 seconds of your time. These take a long time, but we have to attack them when we are right. So my co-counsel's father, Charlie Tricarci, who you may or may not know, filed a case in 1969 on behalf of railway workers at the Penn Central who were denied their pensions. The railroad refused to answer, refused to respond. It took 40 years until his daughter, Carla Tricarci, and myself finally got them out of arbitration and into a court. And ultimately, it went to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals after having gone to the Sixth Circuit, the Surface Transportation Board, everything else. And at the final hearing before the Third Circuit, one of the justices was the sister of former President Trump, who sat as a judge on that case and ruled in our favor. So it took us 40 years to get justice for those workers. So I'm not scared of going after railroads. And I've also practiced at the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, where we got a very unusual ruling against a public utility. At the time it was AirTouch, today it's Verizon. So we are going to look at the issues and the causes of actions that we've discussed here today, and look at a way to make sure that they are held to account. So appreciate your time, and I promise you that we're going to look at this with an aggressive eye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I recognize that we're at noon. We've been here since 9:30 in the morning. Barring any further questions from members, I wanted to close us out with one final question, maybe a question and a half that I don't think we touched on yet. And knowing that we really truly look forward to working with the administration on many of the next steps discussed today, I think it can be it'll be a lot of gratifying and important work to do together. But one piece that I don't think we touched on was this notion of notification of when hazardous materials are traveling through Cleveland. Council yesterday received a briefing, as Ms. Colombi mentioned at the very beginning of our time together today, from the Federal Railroad Administration. And there is every state has a designee, a designated agency that is to be alerted of hazardous materials statewide, which then is supposed to come down to the local level. Does anyone at this point in time have the ability to provide an update on when and how often the city of Cleveland is being notified in terms of hazardous materials?
You're not getting it. Yeah, we're currently not getting the notices, but that's one thing we're pushing with the mayors and managers. But I can reach out to our partners at ODOT, because if they are getting that information and we're supposed to be receiving it, we can definitely have a conversation with them on where that's at. So let me report back, if you will.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chief Ponte. I think one of our questions is, we know it is a state agency. I'm not even sure if we're clear which state agency does get that notification. So definitely look forward to learning from you about those procedures. And then one final question, I'm going to go back to Chief Luke. Really, I think it's so poignant, it is not lost on any of us that were the worst to occur, our first responders are putting their bodies on the line. And we are so grateful to our first responders and those of you who keep us safe and have these emergency operations plans in place and are prepared to respond in the case of a disaster. So thank you so much. My closing question has to do with resources for training. Chief Luke, you mentioned that Norfolk Southern, on its own accord, has opened a new training center in Ohio, or intends to offer more trainings to local first responders. We know that Senator Brown and Senator Vance's bill includes increasing grant funding available for emergency responders, for training emergency responders. Is there any closing comment around the resources we currently have, whether grants the city receives or training resources, and do you think that there is room for growth, and what would you advocate for?
Chairperson, just a point of clarification. I believe the Norfolk Southern Training Center was mandated by the governor's office.
Okay.
Since my short time being appointed, we have put a focus on pursuing grant funding, because I believe that there's a lot of funding that is available that sometimes it just falls off the table and we don't see it. Specifically in this, I've assigned specific personnel for emergency operations training and to pursue grant funding. So there is a lot of improvement in that area that the Division of Fire can do, and we're kind of focused on that right now.
And to the chair, we have a wonderful grants administrator in Dawn Hartsong for public safety. I believe it's either 25 years or nearly 30 that she's been in that role. She does secure a lot of federal grants, and I'll work with her in getting a report out, but I know just in the last year, we were awarded a number through the state working with her, and the money was obviously passed on from the feds to the state, but we could give you a deep listing of all the grants that she's going after, and every time the NOFOs come out for those, I send them to her, and she's already on it, so she's wonderful to work with.
That's awesome. Please extend our thanks to Ms. Hartsong, and if helpful on our end, we did receive from the Federal Railroad Administration a list of grants that they put out for first responder training, so we can share that information.
I'd also be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity because it was announced this morning in a press release from DOT, but the City of Cleveland was awarded a $1.8 million grant on smart signalization, and now it's got me thinking after this conversation, I'll work with Callie to see if there's any overlap as it relates to the railroad conversation we're having today.
Thank you. I truly cannot thank everyone enough for your time. Having all of you at the table was very meaningful, very informative, very much appreciated. Thank you so much to members of the public and others who joined in the audience today. And certainly, this might not be the last hearing we hold on this topic, right? Because I think this is an evolving environment with a lot of new circumstances to consider. But thank you so much for this next step today. Truly appreciate everyone's time. I'll gavel us out. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, at the bottom of the legal authority slide,